Hello and welcome. Every year, one of my sons asks me to sew his Halloween costume. 2 years ago, I made this Lefty costume from FNAF, and last year I designed and made the medic coat from TF2, which he has decided to reuse for this year's costume since it still fits. Our first step was heading to the fabric shop to pick fabric and trimmings. He decided on reflective tape and spiderweb lace on gray fabric. He wants a medicinal bandolier with vials of herbs on the front and an embroidered badge on the back. He had initially asked me to embroider directly onto the coat, but I did not want to permanently alter it, so we settled on the badge, which he can remove and keep for another use in the future. He had asked for a fancy cursive font, however, I did not feel that it was creepy enough for Halloween, so I showed him this other jagged font that I had seen before, and he loved it. As I was designing the badge, I had to figure out where to put the slime he wanted. I decided to draw a curved roof and floor around the word crypt and have the slime dripping down from that. Later, you will notice a slight difference between the initial design and the final piece. I ended up with a big gap between the second E and the P in Keeper, so I added a big drip of slime coming from the floor of the crypt to fill that gap. I spent a good amount of time measuring the correct size for the badge and scaling up the design. It looks so much better. Now, on to the long task of manually transferring the pattern to the fabric and modifying where needed. My son had picked this navy blue, almost black for the lettering, which I will be doing in stem stitch. This fluorescent green is to fill in the slime. This will be done in a satin stitch, and this lovely olive green is meant to form the floor, roof, and a thin outline on the slime. I will be doing those in a small stem stitch as well. I think they will look lovely together. My toddler has decided to join me for the beginning of the embroidery. He loves sitting with me for hand stitching and is usually a lot more calm than this. I do have to remind him at one point that needles are indeed sharp, so slamming his hand onto the fabric is not a wise choice. After the first letter, I actually ended up removing the fabric and wrapping the hoop with a cotton twill tape because even at its tightest, the hoop was just not holding the thin gray cotton. The twill tape did the trick, and I was able to finish the badge with relative ease. I debated whether or not to add the fluorescent green as an outline on the lettering, and I am so happy I did because it looks worlds better than the plain black letters. The finished bandolier needed to be 4 inches wide. However, because I had draped and marked the fabric directly on my son, I did not measure its length. I gave myself a 2-inch seam allowance with the cotton, but I cut the interfacing at exactly 4 inches wide. Using gray thread, I attached the interfacing to the back panel of the bandolier. Please do not come after me for not using pins. I never do on homebrew projects such as this. I will correctly measure, mark, and pin pieces when I am working with a pattern, though. Before attaching the front and back pieces together, I went ahead and added a dart on the shoulder to give it proper shape and prevent gaping at the neck. I stitched the pieces together just at the edge of the interfacing. I left myself about a 6-inch gap to turn the piece right side out. I trimmed the seam allowance down to about a 1/4 inch and left the full allowance along that 6-inch gap. I find it easier to press and sew those edges when they are a bit longer. I pressed the shoulder dart on a tailor's hem, but it was too wide, so I switched to a sleeve hem. You'll see that I do not put water directly into my iron. I don't know why I don't like doing that, but I just don't. Instead, I have a cute brown glass antique-looking spray bottle that I use. After pressing the bandolier, I moved on to finishing the badge. I decided to use a stiff cotton canvas as the interfacing to give the badge more rigidity compared to the bandolier. I sewed the front and back pieces right sides together, only halfway around. This allowed me enough room to easily insert the stiff canvas and make sure the trimmed seam allowance was towards the back. I then pressed the edges from the back and carefully started rolling the unfinished seam inwards and pinning with these clips until the edge was mostly round. I then stitched it shut by hand using a whip stitch, as the embroidered letters were too close to the edge and I could not do a top stitch. Once that was finished, I moved back to the bandolier and started attaching the reflective tape. My son wanted the reflective tape on the top edge and the spiderweb lace along the bottom edge. When we were at the fabric shop, I had asked for a yard of each. However, they only had 30 inches left of the tape and a little over a yard of the lace. I had to carefully measure, mark, and re-measure where the badge would sit so that I could cut the reflective tape and sew it down to look like it spans the entire length of the sash when there is actually no tape behind the badge. I had just enough tape to make it work. I'm glad I decided to do 2 rows of stitches to prevent the edge of the tape rolling up from use, because when I got back to that shoulder dart, I saw that I had failed to catch the fabric on my first line of stitches. I was able to catch the fabric in the second pass through, and the rest of the tape went smoothly. Before attaching the lace, I switched my thread from gray to black. I then carefully lined up the 2 ends of the bandolier to overlap and form a point at the bottom. Then I lined up the very edge of the lace with the very edge of the bandolier. The edge of the lace has this channel for stitching to fabric that looks like a teeny tiny ladder. And this was by far my favorite step in the bandolier, as it was so satisfying to stitch in a straight line in that tiny ladder. I was left with about 6 inches of lace by the end, so I trimmed it at ½ inch past the edge and folded it under, tacking it down to make a nice crisp corner. Look how beautifully she turned out. I hand-stitched the badge on, making sure to line up the markings I made earlier so that the badge sits straight up and down while the bandolier is slanted. I did enough stitches so the badge would not come off, but not so many stitches that it would be hard to remove later when my son transfers it to something else. I was careful that my needle only caught the edge of the bandolier and the back of the badge so that my stitches wouldn't show through and ruin the embroidery. And here she is finished and on the mannequin with the coat. I stitched on the vials off camera. They have cloves, butterfly PT, charcoal, and cinnamon bark. The reflective tape turned out well and makes me feel better that he will be wearing it. There is a nice little pocket hidden at the bottom. And here is the badge. My son ordered a Plague Doctor mask from Temu to complete the costume. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you next time as I make matching button-up shirts for my sons using this quirky chest piece cotton.